Crucifixion, used extensively by the Roman Empire as a public deterrent. The victim was first scourged until flesh was torn open, weakening the body before execution even began. Nails or ropes secured the wrists and feet to a wooden cross. As the body sagged, breathing became increasingly difficult. To inhale, the victim had to push up on shattered legs and torn arms. Exhaustion eventually made breathing impossible. Death could take hours or several days, caused by suffocation, dehydration, shock, or heart failure, all while exposed to sun, insects, and mockery.
Impalement. A sharpened stake was slowly forced through the body, usually entering through the anus or abdomen. Executioners carefully positioned the stake to avoid major organs, ensuring prolonged survival. The stake was then planted upright, leaving the victim suspended. Gravity slowly worsened internal injuries. Victims often remained alive for days, fully conscious, dying from infection, dehydration, or internal bleeding.
Poinacule, an ancient Roman execution reserved for those who killed a parent. The condemned was sewn into a thick leather sack along with live animals such as snakes, dogs, or monkeys. The sack was sealed and thrown into a river. Inside, the victim experienced panic, suffocation, drowning, and violent attacks from the trapped animals. The punishment symbolized total rejection from society and nature.
Pressing, peine forte et dure, used primarily in medieval England to force defendants to plead. The victim was laid flat on their back, often naked, with a board placed over their chest. Heavy stones were stacked on top, added slowly over time. Breathing became harder as ribs cracked and lungs collapsed. Some survived for days, choosing death over submission. Others suffocated as organs failed under the pressure.
Boiling alive. The condemned was placed into a large cauldron filled with water, oil, or tar. The liquid was heated gradually to prolong suffering. Skin blistered, peeled, and separated from muscle as the temperature rose. Internal organs cooked slowly. Screams often continued until the throat swelled shut or shock set in. This punishment was meant to terrify witnesses.
Damnatio ad bestias. Victims were thrown into Roman arenas to be killed by wild animals. Some were chained or wounded beforehand to prevent escape. Lions, bears, or leopards tore into exposed flesh. Death was violent, unpredictable, and entirely public. The crowd's reaction determined whether the punishment was prolonged or ended quickly.
Drawing and quartering, used in medieval Europe for treason. The victim was dragged through streets behind a horse, often already injured. Execution followed, sometimes by hanging or beheading. The body was then cut into 4 pieces. These parts were displayed on city gates or bridges as warnings, ensuring the punishment continued even after death. Bastinado. The victim was restrained while the soles of the feet were beaten with rods or canes. The feet swelled, split, and bruised deeply. Though rarely fatal, the pain was extreme and incapacitating. Many victims suffered permanent nerve damage, unable to walk properly again. Tunica molesta, a Roman execution method involving a garment soaked in flammable materials like resin. The clothing was forced onto the victim and ignited. Flames clung to the body, burning flesh, while the garment prevented escape. Victims burned alive in front of crowds, often screaming until collapse. Decimation, a collective military punishment used by Roman legions. Soldiers were divided into groups of 10. One was randomly selected and beaten to death by the others, using clubs or stones. Survivors were forced to watch and participate, reinforcing obedience through terror and guilt. Running the gauntlet. The condemned was stripped and forced to pass between 2 rows of soldiers wielding sticks, whips, or weapons. Blows landed continuously from both sides. Victims often collapsed from blood loss before reaching the end. Those who survived were frequently left permanently disfigured. Cucking stool. Used mainly against women accused of social offenses. The victim was strapped into a chair attached to a long beam and dunked repeatedly into rivers or ponds. Between submersions, they were hoisted back up, gasping for air. Mockery from crowds added humiliation to near drowning. Penal transportation. Criminals were exiled to distant colonies under harsh conditions. Transport ships were overcrowded and filthy, spreading disease. Many died before arrival. Survivors faced forced labor, starvation, and isolation, effectively turning punishment into a slow death sentence. Mutilation punishments. Mutilation was used across many cultures as a legal punishment meant to permanently mark the criminal. Hands were cut off for theft, noses for adultery, ears for lying, and tongues for blasphemy or speaking against authority. The act was usually performed without anesthesia, often in public. Blood loss was severe and infection was common. Even when victims survived, they were left disabled and visibly marked, ensuring lifelong shame and social exclusion. Burning at the stake. The condemned was tied to a wooden post surrounded by piles of wood, straw, or coal. Fires were often lit slowly to extend suffering. Flames first burned the legs and lower body, causing intense pain as skin blistered and split. Smoke inhalation caused choking and panic before flames reached vital organs. Death could take several minutes or much longer, depending on how the fire was built. Sawing. The victim was suspended upside down, often tied by the ankles. This position kept blood flowing to the brain, delaying unconsciousness. A saw was placed between the legs and slowly drawn downward. Executioners worked carefully to prolong suffering. Victims often remained conscious for much of the process, dying from blood loss or shock only after extreme pain. Rat torture. A cage containing live rats was strapped against the victim's torso, commonly the stomach or chest. Heat was applied to the cage using fire or hot coals. As the temperature rose, the rats panicked and began chewing through flesh to escape. They tore into skin, muscle, and organs. Victims usually died from internal injuries, infection, or shock. The stocks. The victim's head and hands, sometimes feet, were locked into wooden boards and placed in a public area. Movement was impossible. The punishment could last hours or days. Crowds often threw rotten food, stones, or waste at the victim. Exposure to sun, cold, rain, hunger, and humiliation turned confinement into prolonged suffering. Waterboarding. The victim was restrained on their back with their head tilted downward. Cloth was placed over the face and water was poured steadily onto it. The cloth trapped water, triggering the sensation of drowning. The body reacted with uncontrollable panic, choking, and gasping. Though it did not always cause death, repeated sessions caused extreme psychological trauma and physical damage. Walling in. The condemned was placed inside a small enclosed space, such as a niche, room, or pit. Brick or stone was used to seal the opening completely. Darkness, silence, and lack of air set in quickly. Victims were often left fully conscious for days before dying. Lead pouring. Molten lead was heated until liquid and poured directly into the ears or mouth of the victim. The intense heat instantly burned internal tissue and bone. The metal hardened inside the body, causing catastrophic damage. Pain was immediate and overwhelming. Death followed quickly from shock or fatal injury. Snake pit. The victim was thrown into a pit filled with snakes, sometimes venomous. Panic caused frantic movement, increasing the chance of bites. Multiple bites led to paralysis, organ failure, or suffocation. Even non-venomous snakes could kill through constriction or sheer terror. Death varied from minutes to hours. Exposure execution. Victims were tied or chained outdoors without shelter. They were left to face extreme heat, cold, wind, and rain. Hunger and dehydration weakened the body over time. Animals and insects often attacked exposed flesh. Death came slowly, making nature itself the executioner.
Coffin torture. The victim was sealed inside a coffin or box barely large enough to breathe. Some were buried underground, others left exposed. Air supply was limited. Panic, suffocation, and dehydration followed. Death could take hours or days depending on ventilation and temperature.
Brand of shame. Heated metal stamps were pressed into visible areas such as the face, neck, or forehead. Flesh burned instantly, leaving permanent scars. The pain was intense, but survival was expected. The true punishment was lifelong humiliation, as the mark publicly identified the person's crime forever.